And I'm super happy to also announce our moderator of today. And I'm really, really looking forward to Elise Terranova to take over the whole program. And she's a game designer, and she also did an amazing job last year at the Amaze Berlin 2020 Total Digital. And yeah, welcome.
Thanks, Torsten. You look a little bit relieved to hand over moderation duties to me, I have to say.
Yeah, but it's also good preparation for me for the Amaze Awards, because I'm going to do the moderation of the Amaze Award. Is a big thing, right? I mean,
that's true.
So I have to be very relaxed, and so it's a good training.
Lots of people, lots of games.
Are you nervous?
Always.
Always.
Always when I speak, yes, always.
Maybe the Fritz Cola will help.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Not awkward product placement at all. Delicious.
Yeah, it's live from Berlin, Urban Spree Gallery. Elise, you take over.
Can I ask you a few questions before you go?
No.
Oh, just little
not
ones.
prepared for that. Okay.
Tattoo.
Tattoo. Oh,
Tattoo.
Yes.
Torsten.
There's a tattoo lottery.
Yeah.
When?
This afternoon at 6.
This afternoon at 6.
Yeah.
Okay. This
and we need more submissions, right? Because
we just had one so far, and I definitely want to have 10 in the bowl. And the game is basically, I have a dice, I roll the dice, and there are 100 tattoos in there. They're not bigger than 5 by 5 centimeters, very minimal. And I first roll the dice. If I have a 1, I just take 1. If I roll a 6, then I have to take 6.
Love
and
it.
I put
Tattoo hit points.
everywhere on my wonderful skin.
Okay, so to get your tattoo into the bowl, you can fill out the form via the Maze website, or you can post your design in the Discord. And wouldn't it be awesome to have a picture of your art on the festival director?
Yes. But you also have to know the code of conduct that also applies to my skin. Yeah?
Yes, and code of conduct in general is a great thing to look at and be familiar with. So if you're just joining the festival for the first time, please take a look.
Thank you very much. Elise, it's your stage.
Oh no. So yeah, please get in your tattoo if you'd like to have your work considered. So yeah, it's a pull out of the bowl, which is pretty cool. Apart from that, we're still waiting for the space builds for the moment, so hold on tight, they'll be there soon. Check out the How To Festival for the moment. And our next talk is Sam Alfred, who's going to go through his talk, Terra Nil and the Value of Nature. That's up next.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Terra Nil and the Value of Nature. It's a great honor to be here, and I hope you enjoy. Before we get started, I just want to introduce myself quickly. This is me. My name is Sam. This is when my hair was a lot shorter and I was still allowed to go outside. And I'm from Cape Town, which is a city at the bottom end of Africa. And I work at a studio called Free Lives. We've made titles such as Broforce and Gorn, and these days we're working on Terra Nil. Not the whole studio, just a few of us, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. If you're interested in this talk, you may have played Terra Nil, but just in case you haven't, let me introduce the game quickly. It's a strategy game that we call a reverse city builder. And the reason it's a reverse city builder is because what you're doing is, rather than starting with a piece of natural wilderness and exploiting it for all its natural resources and turning it into a city, you actually start with a wasteland, like you see on the left here, and turn it into a verdant paradise, like you see on the right. You do this through kind of traditional isometric city builder style mechanics, but the flavor of the game is very different. So, for a talk about city builders and nature, this is a slightly strange place to start, but bear with me. I want to ask a question, that is, what are first-person shooter games about? And they're about a lot of things, but when it comes down to it, I think the lowest common denominator is that first-person shooter games are about shooting and killing things. And if you were going to make a first-person shooter game, you'd want to make a game about shooting and killing things, probably. But the reason I bring this up is because interesting things start happening when you start asking, well, what about first-person games without shooting and killing? What do those look like? And when you take away this kind of mainstay of the genre, these tropes, you get some really interesting games. You get games like Portal, which sort of showed us all, I think, back in 2007, what was possible to do with a first-person game that wasn't about killing stuff. You get games like Antichamber, you get games like Slime Rancher. All of these games are incredibly innovative and successful in their own right, but they are all of them first-person games without killing and shooting. Well, I mean, shooting, but not killing. So that being said, let's apply the same experiment to city and factory builders, and really most strategy games in general. So what are the mainstays of this genre, and how do they present themselves? Well, I'd argue that a lot of these games are about colonization, capturing territory. This is Civ, you know, you are expanding the influence of your city, you're getting new hexes, you're using armies to get territory. Expansion, like building a bigger city in city skylines, always building a new housing block. Exploitation of natural resources is kind of a no-brainer for a lot of the games in the genre. That's Factorio and Satisfactory. The exploitation of the natural world is something that humans have done throughout history, and you know, when you're making a game that kind of mirrors that, it's a natural place to go. And then some games, and this is more factory games, but some games are even about infinite growth. They've got procedurally generated universes, and you can just keep building. And you know, the most famous line perhaps about Factorio is that the factory must grow to meet the needs of the ever-growing factory. And I just want to say that, you know, this is not a value judgment. I'm not here to preach and say these are terrible. These are all fantastic games. I'm just talking really about the lowest common denominator, the low-hanging fruit. If you're making a city builder, if you're making a factory builder, what would be the things that you would include by default? And then what happens when you take those away? How do we build a game, a city builder game, a builder game without those themes? And what can we fill in the gaps with? And I think, and what we've tried to do in Terra Nil, you can look at the natural world for inspiration. Sorry, just a sip of water. So to give you a first example, nature's not about infinite growth. Infinite growth is a thing that happens in video games, but it can't happen in the real world. And to illustrate this point, I'm going to talk about the Yellowstone National Park in the United States and the wolf reintroduction experiment, which is perhaps one of the most famous ecological experiments ever. Basically, what happened was in the 1920s, the wolf population, the gray wolf of Yellowstone, was hunted to extinction, and the government mandated the hunting, but this had really adverse knock-on effects, and it caused what's called a trophic cascade in the ecosystem. So the wolf was hunted, and that meant that some of its prey, like the elk, their population increased markedly, and the elk no longer had to be fearful of the wolves. So their traditional habitats where they would graze along the riverbanks in the summer, they just stayed there all year round. And that meant that they didn't have to leave the rivers in winter because they weren't afraid of wolves, and they grazed on these willows and aspens, which are the primary habitat of beavers. And as the willows and aspens disappeared, beavers had less wood to use to build their dams. And as they couldn't build their dams, they lost their habitat. And so the beavers began disappearing from the range. And there were other effects too, like scavengers disappearing, like ravens, who had no carrion to feed on because there were no wolves making kills. And so we can see that, you know, removing a an animal just completely threw out the balance. And just to finish this story, in 1995, with a new bill in the government, wolves began to be reintroduced into Yellowstone. It's been considered widely to be a success. And although it's perhaps overstated, I still think it's worthwhile. The elk populations came down, the willows and aspens started to come back, and beavers began to build dams again. And all of that serves to, as an example, that nature keeps itself in balance. So how do we use that in a video game? Well, Terra Nil's an isometric strategy game. This is what the map looks like. We've got 64 square tiles. I think that's 4,096 tiles, and that's it. That's all you have, and that's what you have to make do with. And you can't buy more land, and you can't just expand outside of that. You gotta make things work inside the space you're given. And so this is a screenshot of the game, and in the bottom left we can see three progress bars, and one of them's got a tick, and the three are fynbos, which I'll talk more about later, wetland, and forest, and you can see them here in the game. And what you have to do here is you have to restore the biodiversity of the world, of the level you're playing, but you have to do it without, you know, making one too much higher than the other, because you have to balance all three. So it's no good covering the entire map with forest, because then you'll have no space for wetland, and you can't buy more land just to get your wetland meter up. So it becomes balancing act, where you want to use the land near the rivers for wetland, because that's the best wetland land, and then you want to use the land near the trees for the fynbos, because that's the best place for that, and what goes where, and it becomes about balancing it, just like in the real world. And that's great, and we're really happy with that design mechanic, but that doesn't talk about the change of the state. A video game is about interacting with the game and changing the state, and what I just described is more of a static entity. Once everything is balanced, where do you go from there? And so we've also taken inspiration from the natural world for interesting mechanics and ways that you can change state. So this over here is a protea bush. This is the national flower of South Africa, and it exists in the fynbos floral kingdom of the Western Cape, where I live, and this is the only part of the world where fynbos exists. And fynbos and the protea have got this very unique property that they actually need to burn to germinate. So a protea flower, once it's pollinated, can actually close itself and wait for years and years until a fire comes by and burns the bush, and then it releases its seeds. And what this does is the fire clears all the undergrowth and the grass and allows the seeds to land on fertile soil without too much competition. And so we thought this is an incredible natural process. And how do we put it into Terra Nil? How do we take inspiration from it? And so this is what it looks like in the game. And I hope this video works. But you construct some fynbos, you start a fire, and then that fire will spread, and it'll leave behind nutritious ash. And as the fire spreads, you can see it's clearing the undergrowth, just like in the real world. And then what happens after that is you can use that ash to construct forests. And this is what that looks like in game. And in fact, through the process of learning about this and doing this research, I realized that this process of clearing land with fire in order to allow larger plants to grow and not have to compete with grasslands exists all over the world, not just in South Africa, although fynbos is unique in the way it's evolved to require it. Let me give you another example of a mechanic in Terra Nil. So these are artificial coral reefs. coral has this really interesting property that it likes to grow on some metals, particularly steel. And actually, coral will grow even better on steel with a very low current, very low voltage current being passed through it. And so when we are trying to regrow coral and reintroduce coral reefs, because as I'm sure you all know, coral reefs are dying all over the world, you can sink decommissioned steel structures, ships, oil rigs, buses, trucks, big things like that, or purpose-built structures like the one on the left, which are created specifically for the creation of artificial reefs. And what happens then is tiny pieces of coral that are taken from existing living coral in a lab are adhered to the superstructure, and because of the large surface area, it allows the coral to grow as quickly as possible. And I just thought this is the most fantastic process, and you know, this is humans interacting with the natural world, and how do we use this in our game? And Terra Nil's still in development, and you should all go wishlist it if you haven't. So we don't have we don't have the actual process yet, but this is what coral looks like in the world of Terra Nil. And once you've placed down the artificial reefs, you can allow the coral to grow on top of it. And so the game is chock full of these mechanics inspired by nature. Those are just a couple of them. But the last thing I want to talk about is another element of city builder games, and it's what about the satisfaction of looking over what you've built? And one of my favorite things to do when I'm playing a city builder or a factory game is you know, at the end when everything's working and it's this fantastic machine, you zoom out and you see all the parts working together, and it's so satisfying. And we don't have that exactly in Terra Nil, but we have something else. There is an incredible sense of satisfaction that, you know, nature and the natural world provides, and the sense of achievement provided by looking over an ecosystem that's been restored. And so we have a stage at the end of a level in Terra Nil where you actually have to recycle all of the buildings that you used to get to that point, and then you load them into an airship and you fly away, and you leave the wilderness as it is. And that, you know, sometimes you restore the weather and it starts raining and animals start coming back, and that I believe is a different sense of achievement. But and I don't think we fully capture the majesty of nature in its entirety in Terra Nil, but I do think we get a little bit. So in conclusion, Terra Nil is a builder game. It's a reverse city builder game that ignores most of the traditional mainstays of the genre, and instead it just tries to fill those design gaps with mechanics and inspiration from nature. It's a game that's not about infinite growth and exploitation, but rather it's a game about gently restoring the environment. And we hope that by making this game, and we can inspire other people to make more games, and other people to create other media that is about a more positive future, because we believe that if all of our media is dystopian and dark and everything about the future presents it as a disaster, then that's what's going to come to pass. And the only way we can avoid that self-fulfilling prophecy is to begin to make positively themed media. And we hope that Terra Nil is a little bit of that. And thanks very much. That's my Twitter handle. You can find me on Twitter, and I hope you enjoyed the talk.